listeners, I'm Sam with Below the Radar, a knowledge democracy podcast. Below the Radar is recorded on the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. On this episode of the Below the Radar B-Sides, our host Amjo Hall is joined by Farheen Haq, an interdisciplinary artist who works with video, textile, installation, and performance to explore personal, familial, cultural, and political reconciliations. Enjoy the episode.
Hello, welcome to Below the Radar. Delighted that you could join us again this week. We have a special guest with us, Farheen Haq. Welcome, Farheen.
Thanks so much. It's really nice to be here with you.
Yeah, great to be in conversation. I'm wondering if we can start with you introducing yourself a little bit.
Sure. So my name is Farheen Haq. My pronouns, she or they. And I have been living here. I'm zooming in from Lekwungen territory. So I've been living and working here as an uninvited guest in Lekwungen territory or Victoria, BC for the past 27 years. I'm a mother. I have two children, an 18-year-old and a 16-year-old that I've raised alongside with my partner of almost 30 years. Who is of Scottish-Irish descent and my ancestry. So we have this wonderful project of raising children on these lands and digging into our culture and history. And so my ancestry is, my family roots are from Bihar, India, by way of Karachi, Pakistan, due to the partition. So both of my parents' families are from Bihar, northeast India. And then both of them made their way to Karachi, Pakistan after the partition. And then from there, my parents found themselves on Haudenosanee territory, which is where I was born and raised, along near the Niagara River, the gorgeous Niagara Falls. I spent since my childhood up until I graduated from high school on those lands. And then after a few years, found myself here living next to the Salish Sea on beautiful Lekwungen territory. So that's a little bit about me. And I'm a multidisciplinary artist. There's the background and the context, and all of that really informs, that I have a practice in lens-based work, social practice, textiles, visual poetics, Sufi poetry, movement, gestural work, dance. Yeah, the medium really doesn't matter so much. It's the ideas and the inquiry that really get me excited. And a lot of that comes from my background, my inheritance as a Muslim woman, growing up in a really contemplative, tight-knit Muslim community on Haudenosanee territory.
Mm-hmm. So, Farheen, we met last summer during the Indian Summer Festival, where you were a panelist at one of the Tiffin talks, but had been mentoring a couple of artists as well. But wondering if you can share just a little bit what brought you into becoming an artist in the first place. Were you already experimenting and working when you were younger? What brought you into this work?
Great question. The beginnings. I've always had this introspective and contemplative nature. And so that's really, as I said in my introduction, what drives a lot of my work in my creative practice. It's this inquiry. And honestly, if I had to whittle it down, that question is often like, who am I, or why am I here? The existential kind of like spiritual questions. And I saw a lot of, I was just a keen observer. I was a third child in a family of three daughters, and I came after 6 years from my eldest two sisters. And so the two of them played a lot, and I was often by myself, my nose buried in books or just kind of watching. And I loved my own company. And so in my own company, I would imagine things, read, love the world of fiction. One of my earliest memories is being in the mosque and like looking at the carpet and seeing images emerge and imagining a whole world in the fibers of the like prayer mat carpet at the mosque. And so that the realm of the imaginary, I think, has always been is a world that I like to live in. And I had a fairly, happy childhood and a very, like, at times painful childhood. And so the space of the creative and the imaginary were like these refuges. Yeah. And so I made art all throughout my childhood and in high school. And then, of course, as a child of immigrants, my parents very overtly steered me away from considering a career or studies in art. Although I had at that time, there was grade 13 in Ontario. So I took OAC art. I remember every year I took grade 9 art, grade 10 art. My dad was a biology teacher. And he's like, okay, you've done the art now. Like, just let's drop that and keep up with your sciences. And I did that. I kept up with my sciences and my social sciences and kept art the whole time. Didn't end up studying art in an undergrad, but had a painting and drawing practice throughout. And my first career was in international development and political science. And I maintained a practice, but just thought it's my hobby. And then after a few kind of like important life events, I realized in my early 20s, I was like, okay, this isn't the milieu I want to be working in. What is it that I need to be working in? And I realized it was art. And at that point, I had enough autonomy, distance from my family that I could begin to make my own choices. And so I began to, like, in earnest, make art and advance, like, do some post-secondary studies about, like, in 2000. It actually coincided. I remember taking some undergrad classes at UVic, and the first day of those classes was September 11th, 2001. Wow. So that was quite like a pivotal moment. Here I was deciding, okay, I was working in the NGO world and then deciding to do some coursework. And then this incredible, profound event happened and marked this trajectory for my inquiry in terms of, like, making art and taking up space in a specific way in my life.
Mm-hmm. And, the art world can be a very white space in a general sense, just to state the obvious. And wondering if you can speak a little bit about some of your earlier pieces that you were making at the time, Endless Tether, Remember, Untitled, Oscillate, Threshold. You're engaging with transitions, liminality, tension between interiority and public space. But just wondering, what were the questions you were asking yourself at that moment as you were making work coming out of your master's?
Right. Yeah. So that works those works like Endless Tether, Adrift. You mentioned a few other early works. Those are like almost over 20 years ago that I did my MFA. And a lot of those works were about, there's two simultaneous struggles that I'm working at. And honestly, in my practice, the tension between interior experience and exterior experience, like you named that, that's always been prevalent. So here I am as a visual practitioner making work I'm making predominantly works for the gallery world, which has tended to be a very white space. And then I live in Victoria, BC. So, after my MFA, which I did, which was in Toronto, I moved back to Vancouver Island. And I remember people being like, what are you doing there? Like, it's changed a lot. But at that point, 20 years ago, very, white dominant space. And so there was that kind of external, challenge for me in leaving my home community, this incredible, tight-knit, diverse community that I had in Niagara and then also in Toronto, and then coming here, settling here, and in my home space, I mentioned it's a really big part of my life, like my partner, and being married to a white person and being in intimate and deep relationship with somebody. So there's like that struggle, and then making work and kind of swimming in the soup of whiteness. And that's where the work comes from, is like this tension. And so Endless Tether, that this is a really early work, as part of my grad work, is just this 3-panel triptych. It's a large scale video installation. And on the one hand, on the one side, it's myself, my torso. I begin with just like a naked torso, and then the middle is empty. And then on the far right is a pair of hands, and it's actually Chris's hands, my partner. And then he either, depending on the vignette that you encounter, it's just a looping installation. He's either tossing me this gorgeous red silk fabric that I then begin to wrap around me like a sari, or, referencing that. Or there's a vignette where we're playing like a tug of war and he's disrobing me. Where I'm in another vignette, I'm pulling the fabric and reclaiming it and taking it. And so there is a way in which all these tensions and struggles that I was working through, being in a post 9/11 world, being married, newly married at that time, to a partner, moving away from my home community, and that partnership, that marriage, it was a big rupture, a moment of rupture in my family. I'm happy to say now, 28 years later, like that rupture has somewhat healed, and time can certainly be a balm for things. But at that time, these were the pains and the big struggles I was working through, and so then my task, my creative task becomes how to use visual poetics, gesture, movement to embody and to explore these things. Like, what does it mean to be a Muslim woman for me in this time? What does it mean for me to have a partner who is white? What is it for me to reveal my body, to conceal it? What is it for, just all those things? And I don't have answers, but the question drives me to give kind of shape and form to the inquiry. And honestly, the inquiry often comes from struggle and hardship. It's a way for me to work through those things.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. In some of your work, you certainly explore a kind of matrilineal inheritance in some of your work. I am my mother's daughter, remembering our mothers, drinking from my mother's saucer, a few of these. And you've shared previously with me some video pieces as well when we met before, and I'm wondering if you can share just a little bit of some of those works that you've done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, I think about this, I spent there's a large period of my practice where I was exploring, again, domestic spaces of care, the economy of care, the visibility of it, again, stemming from my own experience, continuing to have a practice, and then being in the space of motherhood and occupying the domestic realm in a way that felt so different, palpably and viscerally different than any other period in my life, when I was taking care of my children when they were babies and young children and required that physical care. And so, that had me starting to think about things like, wow, like as soon as I step out the door, how do I feel? How am I seen? And then when I come back home and I close the door, the psychogeography of my own experience of myself, like how that door, that public private, as soon as I enter and move through those different spaces, how that shifts. And it definitely was a struggle being a parent of 2 children and maintaining a practice. I often felt like, oh, I'm not keeping up, and just, kind of, even though I know I'm making the work for myself, but there's all that internal pressure of productivity and keeping up and being, visible. And so all these questions of like, who am I in this phase and in this role began to have me start to really look at my relationship with my mother in a different way. And particularly as my daughter, my eldest, was getting older. And then there was lots of grit and challenge in that relationship for me to kind of work through. I realized, as my children were getting older and didn't need me in the same way, like how that economy of care was shifting my experience of myself. And then there's a couple things that happened. There was this incredible grief that emerged, which resulted in a whole body of work related to early motherhood for me. There's an exhibition called Being Home, and it showed had a local BC tour, but it had pieces like Drinking from My Mother's Saucer, which you named. Also this piece, one of my favorite pieces, actually, it's called Feast, and it's our kitchen table laying on its side on the floor. And then there's a projection of my belly breathing on the wood grain of this table. And so this idea of just like my body, how it's this space of care, how I've actually had to like sacrifice and give up things in order to gain, like, you know, and Drinking from My Mother's Saucer is also this meditation on this. And in that image for listeners, there's a teacup that's just being filled with chai, and it's a very English teacup. It's made of bone china. And then there's chai from a copper vessel being poured slowly. And when it comes to the very top of the teacup, the chai, it's almost about to spill, but I stop. And so you see the meniscus. And then there's a rumble that begins. And the soundtrack of that video is a buffalo stampede. And the cup begins to tremble as you hear this audio of a buffalo stampede. Some folks have said it sounds like a train. There's a disruption, and the tea begins to quiver on the surface. And every once in a while, there's a spillover, and you see a rivulet of like chai pouring into the saucer. And for me, that is a meditation on this, what I'm speaking about, like the maternal body and the loss and sacrifice that often accompanies that experience, whether I give up my own body and allow my another being to live inside me for 9 months, whether the maternal body is the earth. And then I ask the question, okay, I have this rich, abundant life where I can feed and nourish myself and my family here on these lands. And who am I taking away from? What am I taking? What's being sacrificed in my gain and in my nourishment? And then it made me think about my own mother, where I think about the experience of so many immigrant women, and my mother's story specifically, where she came to Turtle Island at the age of 17 when she entered an arranged marriage that her family arranged with my father, and chose that as out of duty and love for her family. And also had her own dreams that she sacrificed in order to fulfill this family responsibility and obligation. And, she had dreams of being a scientist or a doctor. And I've seen throughout my childhood and my adult life the countless sacrifices that my mother has made. And so that all of, I'm compressing like probably 15 years here, but my own experience of motherhood, and then that grief I spoke to about my children getting older and being quite surprised, because honestly, I spent most of my, from the time that like they were babies to about like 10, thinking, I just can't wait till they get older so I can just be in the studio full time. And then when that happened, when they, they're school age, they're off, they have activities, I felt this like it's such a transition to like, oh, they don't need me to hold them. I don't have to make dinner every night. Like I was surprised at my own grief of letting that phase go. And then, so that's when I made Drinking from My Mother's Saucer, Feast, like I mentioned. I have this piece called Fold, where I'm just gathering up linens. It's on a dresser, a video. And I'm gathering up linens, referencing Michelangelo's Pieta, like in a wide stance. And it's just the laundry and the linens. And there's like this endless pile, and I just gather them and hold them and cradle them in my arms. And it's like, it seems so ridiculous. I'm like lamenting the end of the endless laundry and holding the baby. And Yes, it's such a struggle, and it's a cliche, like the days are long and the years go by fast. That's what they say about parenting. And it's the truth. And that moment where it's like, oh, right. And we're done with this. It was beautiful and brutal. That paradox. That's how
Yeah.
I find myself talking about actually most things in life, but specifically parenting and relationships, right? Like exhausting and exhilarating, beautiful, brutal, like the paradox. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. This is wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. I wanted to speak a bit also in your body of work. You've also, in other works, foregrounded gratitude, prayer, healing, offering, ceremony, and wondering if you can speak a little bit to that part of your practice and the works that you make that have a relationship to those areas.
Mm, sure. Yeah, I really see my studio practice as my spiritual practice, as an extension of, or as a beginning of. It's, more and more how I speak about my work, and actually not even speak, but understand my work. It is the place of contemplation, ritual. And so the works sometimes demand that of me, that, there's that ritual and contemplation happening in private in the studio. It's never in isolation. My partner is a big part of my studio practice, with logistics and feedback and friends and colleagues. And so there's the community eye. And then sometimes the work, when it wants to be seen or witnessed, also asks for an activation. The work tells me if it's going to be an object, a video, and sometimes it's both. And so, for example, I'll give an example of Hamara Badan, which was a piece that came out of this body of work in this touring exhibition I have called I Am My Mother's Daughter, Main Apni Maa Ki Beti Hoon, which has been showing the last few years. And Hamara Badan is a 140 pounds of lentils, and it's a floor work. And it emerged from this lovely improvisation that I had with my mother while I was developing this body of work in homage and in honor to my mother and her resilience and matrilineal knowledge. And that we were just in the studio. And what I often do is I'll set up the camera and I'll record myself doing gestures, improvising. And so my mother and I had spent a week together just around the corner from where she first arrived on Turtle Island. I was doing research with her. And, but my mother's, like many other South Asian moms I know, food is her love language. So we would cook together. I would ask her about who taught her to cook, and knowing that that's a way that we connect and she shares her knowledge. We were sifting lentils one afternoon, and I just put the camera on and filmed us. And we were sifting the lentils before we're going to make dal. And then at one point, my mom pours the lentils into my hands. And, it's nothing. It's not filmed beautifully or anything. But when I was watching it in the studio, that gesture for me encapsulated, became this distillation of this experience of researching, listening to her, contemplating her story, her, my palm open, receiving, her pouring the lentils into my hand. And immediately I had this image of this triptych, this video loop, which is called Silsila. And it features my mother's hands on the top, mine in the middle, and then my daughter's hands. And there's just a waterfall of lentils. So they're coming from the sky into her hand, pouring into my hand, pouring into my daughter's, pouring out. And then at the bottom of this installation, I knew that was going to be a work on its own. And then I just knew that there needed to be something else. There needed to be some other activation that would bring people along with me on this journey that I'd been experiencing with my mother, and, reconciling my own grief of of acknowledging her sacrifices, and also acknowledging my own separation and lack of, honestly, I will say, like when I was younger, in my 20s and most of my 30s, until I had my own children, my lack of like deep respect and understanding of her experience. And I wanted to write that. I wanted to grieve that, and I wanted to center her. And so that's what the project was. Like, I am my mother's daughter. And so I contemplated what else is going to go alongside silsila, which silsila means lineage or transmission. And, you know, knowing that actually, like, I am a part of that affirmation, I am my mother's daughter, is really for me this reclamation that I am from her, and to write that kind of thinking, that internalized Western patriarchy that had lodged itself into my psyche, that I'm nothing like her. I don't want to be her. I want to be out in the world, seen publicly, you know, appreciated for my thoughts and my productivity, and not just in the domestic realm. And so I played around with lentils, and I came on that I knew I needed to work with the weight of my mother as this symbol and metaphor. And then fast forward after like a couple of months of back and forth with my mom, and okay, what should I do with the lentils? Like, I want the lentils to be in the gallery, not just on the video screen. She's like, make a bed, lie in it, like you used to lie with me. Like, she didn't miss a beat. It was awesome. So I'd like send her things. I had giant pots, like bake sheets, and I was like, okay, maybe there's gonna be a giant pot and spilling out with lentils. Anyway, I think I was just on a run one day. And, you know, I walk or run along the shoreline most mornings. That's part of my like healthcare, but honestly, it's also part of my like moving meditation. Just be by the water. And it came to me, it was like, wrap the lentils, wrap her up, swaddle her. And those lentils became Hamara Badan. And as soon as I got the idea of wrapping 140 pounds of lentils, this performance just kind of had its, or ceremony, as I like to say, had its own beating heart, and it told me what to do. And so the show was first installed at Truck Gallery, this piece in Calgary. And so at the opening, I created a ceremony where I created the space of a janaza, which is the Muslim funerary rites. And I wanted to move through this grief and this sadness, and kind of burying this old way of knowing my mother, and to kind of bring into newness, and to unswaddle or to swaddle, and to like reference the care and the time that I was taking to be in right relationship with my mother. And so my son was part of the ceremony. He played the dhol. My mother's voice was telling a story. And the ceremony began with, I bundled up 140 pounds of lentils. And then at the opening, I said, I need help. I need help carrying her in. And so people help me. We carry the bundle in. And then as I open up the ties that hold this, what looks like a body, my mother's voice emerges, there's drumming happening. And then I transform this body of lentils into this beautiful, minimal, like cone of lentils that you might encounter at a market or in a bulk store. And the act of reorganizing, kind of washing over the lentils with kind of as one would wash a body, was a way for me to move through my grief and transform or alchemize it or transform it into something and give it shape. And people come along with me on that. And then it became the floor work, Hamara Badan, which means our body, which accompanies silsila. So there's wow. That's an example of the ceremony or the ritual making to give form and shape to an inner process. And, you know, and I really think a lot of that comes for me with from this experience of having observed the janaza, growing up at the mosque, all night prayers, the 5 daily prayers, the touching your head to the ground, moving. There's a way in which these rituals become choreographies for moving through things if and when they're, done with this kind of consciousness or this idea of awakening to the experience of what we're doing. They can also become very rote, mechanical rituals as well. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I was going to speak a little bit, this diasporic experience that many of us go through. It comes with negotiations and tensions and filtering and separation and bringing things together in various ways, which is a kind of struggle in so many ways, and also in the making of artistic work when you're trying to pull these themes together. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to, how you've been able to negotiate that tension between personal vulnerability and public visibility, and at the same time, holding on to what's personal in those family stories and bringing them out into public view. That requires a certain type of care, and the public in terms of how it's going to be read by different audiences, communities, and sometimes it's not very clear how things are going to shake out once you place them into public. And so there's a friction there that is part of the work, I suppose, and the stakes of the work.
Yeah, that's a really thoughtful question, and something that I absolutely have grappled with, even this is almost, 7 or 8 years ago when I was doing that work with my mother, spending time with her and digging into her story and asking about her arrival on Turtle Island and making work, about my family, but particularly that work. And at that point, I was also working with a group of aunties that I grew up with who were like my other mothers, my community mothers. And I realized wow, I'm going into some very sensitive territory. There's trauma here, there is pain, and I want to be careful. And I'm not making work that's therapy for other people. It certainly is therapeutic for me. But I think there is certainly a tension because there is something very personal, very vulnerable about the work. And I will say, honestly, half the time I'm like, why am I making work that's so personal? It'd just be easier to X, Y, or Z. But it's the thing that I come back to. And it's, like I said, it's the thing that I'm grappling with. That's what gives me that electricity and charge to make work. It's I need a problem to work through. I need a creative problem or a spiritual problem. And so what I did come to understand about my process as I've been doing this, particularly, for example, the work with my mother, the way that I took care of her and myself and her family was to not speak for her and to bring it back. And this is actually what I've done when I think about my over 20 year practice, filter the experiences and the stories through my experience, my body. So the relationship with my mother, it's not her story. It's how her story impacts me and how I understand myself better through hearing her story, unpacking, going back there. So, for example, I talked about I felt disconnected from my mom. I didn't want to be like her. I had judgments about her. What is that saying about me? How have I internalized certain Western feminist ways of understanding what womanhood is, what motherhood is, what being a successful adult is, what those things mean, and then to never make the presumption that I can speak for anybody else, like for her, but that I can speak to how it moves me and how I understand myself and how it shifts through me. So, there's a video that I did in I Am My Mother's Daughter called Aankh Band Ke Dekho, where, when we spoke previously, I've told you about this work where I just could not understand that my mother had her eyes closed for the whole time of her wedding ceremony. And I just thought that was ridiculous. And that photo in our family album just like bothered me so much. And then I decided, well, what would it be like for me to do that? And how can I be curious about this gesture? And so, speaking about ceremony, I recreated my mother's wedding ceremony and some of the rituals that my mother and father went through and performed them with the Salish Sea. I often sit and meditate or walk along the water. What would it be like to use that set of language and transpose that into my experience of coming into relationship with the land and territory I'm on? So there's a way in which it's like I'm translating, shifting, and also it's interesting. All of a sudden, I'm thinking of geometry, like the like kind of overlaying and translating and shifting, but then also playing with scale, like that personal scale, that inner experience, and broadening that scale to something larger. So there's like these two humans getting married, and then it's like, oh, me coming into relationship with a territory or a land. I don't know. I think I've diverged from your question, but
no. This is all important context. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think honestly, the way that I feel, that I take care of these really personal, vulnerable things is to stay in the realm of the personal, to bring it. And, even my early work, like Endless Tether or Uncovering, or like they all were like performances or embodied gestures for the camera. And there's I'm not always doing that now, but that how it feels in my body physically or in my interior experience is the medium through which I experience or make sense or digest the ideas I'm working with.
I know that you've been mentoring some artists on Vancouver Island in Victoria. And since we are still a university-based podcast, albeit in exile, where there's a lot of students that'll be listening to this, and wondering if you can just speak to, your advice to artists coming out of school, the difficulty, the tenacity, the kind of trade secrets of being able to produce work over a long period of time when there are these, challenges around funding, access to galleries, or having a place to show your work, when the overarching structures of it can actually be set up barriers, in how you've been able to sustain your practice over this long period of time.
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. I love speaking to university students, and I'm just remembering one of the quotes that I have when I often there's an ongoing lecture that I would give at UVic for a friend who taught this like intro to like creative process course. I remember it's an article from Carol Becker and on Herbert Marcuse and the subversive thinking. I can't even remember the title of the article, but basically, looping back to like why I began to make art, like the role of the imaginary and the creative realm being a place where we can actually like suspend the oppressions of the reality we live in and begin to like make something new, that it's actually very real to work in the imaginary. And so I say that like my advice to younger folks or to artists working is that, particularly in this day when we have this real, beautiful, earnest push for justice and righting wrongs because we can see the pain of the world, to not forget that the act of making and the act of creation is and can be a process of righting wrongs. And I also feel like the thing that has sustained me is this necessity that the only way we are going to know how to keep going and how to continue our practices, whatever they may be, is to be connected to our inner compass. So here's where the spiritual is political, and it's that I have to be in touch with my heart's deepest longing. I have to know what it is that I love. And, it's so easy, especially in this world where, we're taught, oh, you like, look at this matters. Like our attention is put out to different things. But for me, it's like, how do I bring my attention out from within? What is it that makes, whether you call it your heart song or like your true longing, but there is something like a question, a quest for that each of us has been given, something we deeply love and makes our heart sing. That's the place that I feel we have to be connected to. We have to know ourselves to know how we can best move in the world and best serve the world. And I think that's what sustained me. So I always say to students, like, use, because this is how I work, there's lots of other ways, but use your life. You can, whether it's your experiences, what's touched you, you can make that go into abstraction. You can write it, like, you don't have to use your story and lay it all out like I necessarily do, but be in touch with the thing that makes your heart quiver, that experience, that song, that memory, that gesture, and let that guide you, whatever it ends up looking like. But if we're not connected to ourselves, we cannot be connected to each other, to the more than human realm, to people around the globe. The first place of deep connection is ourselves, and we can't bypass that. And so I think that also answers like why I go dig in, but it's know thyself, know what you love, let that fuel you, because there's something incredible that has been gifted to each of us. This is where I really draw on like this idea like of ishq and love, like in the Sufi devotion, or whether it's Bhakti devotion and non-dualism, but this idea of like that longing, that love is an expression of the divine. And when we know we're connected to that, then we move from this like deeper current as opposed to something that's surface that I got to fix this, or I want to make work about this. And it just comes from a source that's connected to, I don't even know what it is, but that's the beauty of it. It's the mystery.
It's so beautiful to listen to you articulate it like that. Farheen, is there anything you'd like to add?
Oh, I'm like, I want to ask you all sorts of questions. I feel like I chat a lot, and I don't know. I think I'm really excited. My current work has me diving into ghazals and Sufi poetry. And, I'm just so grateful for all these, like the way the kaleidoscope unfurls. Like, I think even, 20 years in, just every time I speak about my work, it's like the kaleidoscope shifts. And to have you as a listener and as somebody who's asking questions, and then the folks that are listening, it's a gift to be able to like, oh, in this time, in this context, with these colors, I've seen myself in a different way. And there's kind of this presence and aliveness. And I'm very excited about bringing poetics and ghazals and Urdu into my work, because there is such a politic that is so salient to our times. And it's this ancient technology, and it brings up this idea of like multivalence and multiplicity. And, and encourages me, and I find all listeners, to just keep swimming in this divine mystery that we're in. And it feels like such an antidote to so much of the world where it's like this or this, right or wrong, black and white. And we have so many examples from so many different traditions of that. And I feel like I've inherited this incredible gift that feels like I'm excited to see where it goes and what's in store. So, yeah.
Farheen, thank you so much for joining us on Below the Radar. It's so wonderful to be in conversation with you.
Thank you.
Below the Radar is a knowledge democracy podcast originally created by SFU's Van City Office of Community Engagement. The Below the Radar B-sides are supported by Van City Credit Union. Thanks for listening to this episode with Farheen Haq. Find out more about her work in the show notes, and thanks again for tuning in.